Welcome back to the Urban Monk, Dr. Pedram Shojai. So happy to be here. Like I mentioned in the last episode, it's been a while. Had a long hiatus, moved my family to Utah and, up in the mountains skiing and hiking and all that. And just had to get back on the saddle. So I missed the podcast. We had a lot of people. I surveyed our audience and they're like, dude, what happened to your podcast? I'm like, okay, we're back. So this is my first recording since coming back online. And I really wanted to call in just one of my dearest friends who's just a badass who, all these companies are consulting on me, works, as a professor teaching stuff at the IFM and, researcher and just all around great guy who's out there actually living it and hiking and picking blueberries and doing all the things that, we read we should do. He's just been wonderful. He's been in a lot of my series. Tom Malter, welcome back to the show, man.
Pedram, absolute honor, my friend. It's so great to be with you.
Man, so much water under the bridge. I know you're working on some exciting stuff with Alzheimer's research. You're always doing something cool. But, there's, unfortunately, there's too much work nowadays. There's just so much going on, so much we got to watch out for in our environment. And there's a couple of these headlines that came a couple of weeks ago, and you're the guy that I love talking about this stuff with because you have such a good global perspective on it. One of them was this Johnson & Johnson lawsuit over baby powder. And, it's like, hello, asbestos, what are you doing? Right. And so we could just talk about that real quickly because, we already know that's stupid. But, just the idea of putting asbestos in baby powder, come on. Right.
Yeah. And it's interesting. It's really interesting because asbestos has been attributed to over 10,000 deaths per year. Right. And it was known for a long time to be very toxic and problematic. And it took a separate act of Congress to actually get it removed from industrial chemical use because the industry relied on it so heavily that they didn't want it pulled from the marketplace. So it was attempted over and over and over to get it pulled. And it literally took a pushing of lobbyists and environmental people and even physicians to say to Congress, guys, get this out of the marketplace. It's killing people. And now all of a sudden we're seeing that Johnson & Johnson is getting sued because we have asbestos in talcum powder, in baby powder that's being put on infants all the time. So unfortunately, this is standard. This is what occurs, is that things are allowed into the use of the United States economy without proper safety testing. And many times there's extra ingredients, like, for example, we see all these trials going on with Roundup, right? And how these massive billion-dollar cases are being won now against Roundup causing cancer issues. And it was told to us that the active ingredient in Roundup is glyphosate. And now what we're seeing from these trials is that there's 27 co-formulation chemicals that was found in research and over 400 different chemicals that are added to Roundup mixtures that aren't listed on the label that are found in chemical testing. So we know that there's a lot of stuff that gets approved, put into use that isn't properly labeled and or tested. So goodness, why wouldn't it surprise us then that we have something as simple as baby powder that would have something like asbestos in it? I mean, literally.
Baby powder.
I know, baby powder.
Come on, right?
No, welcome to this planet. Let me put some toxins on your skin. But the reality is that Johnson & Johnson, they knew, according to their own internal documents for decades, that there was a possibility of asbestos contamination in the talc, right? We knew that the government was not properly checking the talc products for safety before going to market, right? And now what's going on is that we have 15,000 plaintiffs 15,000 that are saying that this talc may be contributing or a potential cause of cancers. So this is just another message of, hey guys, we focus on profits a lot in the United States. And it's very difficult and very expensive to track all the nuantic chemicals that might be found in specific products. It's a lot easier for us to turn a blind eye to something than to remove something as a company or corporation, remove something from the industrial marketplace that's providing us billions of dollars of profit. So that's That's basically the message with that talc incident with Johnson Johnson, and that's being repeated over and over again if you look closely in both the news and the scientific literature.
Well, I mean, this current administration has turned it into a feeding frenzy for, you know, a death habit for the planet. I mean, anyone who can get what they want to get out of this administration is getting all, like, you know, the EPA is gone basically, and it's a free for all. And, you know, it's basically like, who cares? We want the rapture. And it's coming, and we're going to accelerate it because, you know, we're going to take all the brakes off. And so, I mean, I'm seeing it every day in the headlines. It's like, what the fuck is this guy doing? It's obviously something that is part of a trend. And the more you look at it, the more you realize the industry is clawing back after, you know, 30 years of kind of getting browbeaten and saying, stop poisoning us. Now it's like, you know what? We got a friendly administration. These gangsters love, you know, they shake them down. They probably, you know, he's probably got a villa somewhere. And all the laws are just getting repealed. So here's the other one that just is stunning to me. Is there's a CNN article from McGill University that just found that in a single tea bag, you could get the release of about 11.6 billion microplastic particles.
Okay, so I know the article you're talking about. So this is a fascinating article that comes up. You know, I keep my eyeball on plastics, right? I'm fascinated by plastics, and I interviewed recently this last year Pete Meyer, and Pete Meyer is one of the founding members of the endocrine societies who are looking at, you know, what is the actual endocrine disruption? What does that mean? Like, where is that coming from? And, you know, he's basically showing us that teeny amounts of plastics change human cell function, right? But this article is bizarre because a lot of people are now moving away from plastics, but some industries are starting to increase their plastic use. And one of them is the tea industry. And the tea industry, instead of using paper bags or silk bags, is now starting to use plastic tea bags. So this group over at McGill University says, all right, let's test out if there's any plastic migration when we use these tea bags. So what they did was they took these tea bags that had tea in them and they cut out the tea and they rinsed the bags with reverse osmosis water over 3 times, right? And they made sure there's no residues of the tea. And then they placed these bags into reverse osmosis water that had been heated up to 203 degrees Fahrenheit or 95 degrees centigrade. And they said, let's see what happens after 5 minutes, right? And after 5 minutes, what we found was there was 11.6 billion microplastics and 3.1 billion nanoplastics. So we've got billions upon billions of these little minute plastic pieces floating around in the water. Now, granted, we've tested fish in the past in the literature. You've seen mussels, you've seen table salt, you've seen all sorts of different things coming from canned foods. Nothing comes close, man. Nothing comes close. These are like thousands of times higher levels of plastics than you'll find anywhere else.
So, and I thought I was having Tulsi tea in the morning to curb my cortisol levels and feel all zen. God damn it, right? Like, what happened there? Like, who okays this? How did that even get there?
Well, that's interesting. I mean, it was probably an oversight of how much exposure will actually come in. And in fact, until this testing was done, I think everybody, once again, turns a blind eye and says, well, it should be fine. It's okay. It's teeny levels. But the reality about things is, you know, the endocrine researchers, like Theo Coburn, for example, who coined the term endocrine disruptant, along with Pete Myers and others, they wrote a book called Our Stolen Future. And in that book, they basically said, wait a second, look what's going on here, guys. We've got these incredibly small amounts of chemicals, but these chemicals from the petrochemical industry, you know, using petroleum manufacturing and whatnot, or now natural gas and whatnot, fracking, we can take these chemical petroleum structures and we can manipulate them slightly to get some sort of action out of them, right? So he's been looking at BPA for years, right? BPA was originally used as a synthetic estrogen to fatten up animals. And back in the 1950s, somebody said, well, wait a second, look at this. I can use this chemical to soften plastics and get some characteristics out of receipt paper that I want to make printed receipts. And I can line cans with it. It keeps oil away from the can, or from sticking to the outside. It sticks to the lining instead of to the can itself and cause rusting and whatever. So now I put it everywhere. And now we see that this chemical acts at picogram levels, teeny levels in the environment. And when it is in small concentrations, I mean, I'm talking, Pedram, I mean, you look at 0.0001 milligrams per kilogram, and you start seeing cell changes in animals and humans. 0.025 milligrams per kilogram, you start seeing breast tissue changes that may predispose to breast cancer. 0.025 permanent changes in the genital tract. In fact, we're seeing with plastic exposures when kids are developing in utero or shortly after birth, right, that we see permanent changes in urogenital function. Boys will have smaller penises. The anal genital tract distance is different. So where their penis is positioned in respect to the anus, that's usually in utero when these embryos are developing. There are these hormones that would normally come to the cells, these what's called stem cells, and they would say, hey, I want you to become a bone cell. I want you to become a muscle cell. I want you to become an immune cell. I want you to become a fat cell. And they'll disrupt. They look similar enough to the hormones that they'll bind to specific receptor sites and they'll interfere with this normal reproduction and development signaling. So this hacking of this hormonal signaling, that's where the term comes from, endocrine disruption. Now, the reality is we're talking about, all sorts of millions of microplastic parts, right? But we need picogram levels of this stuff to cause an effect. So we're going to have, constant effect occurring all over the place. Now,
so what about bioaccumulation as that happens? Like it's like, okay, well, there was so little of it, but it's not like you're having one cup of tea in life, right? If you're having a couple cups a day, how quickly does this stuff start to stack?
Great question. And is it just the tea bags?
Right.
Because you know me, right? I mean, I've been tracking this for a long time. I remember looking at a website from Merchant Research and Consulting back in 2012, and they were bragging at the time that everybody should be investing in BPA because it's a growing industry, and that it increased by the use of 372,000 tons alone in the year 2012.
Yay, so business.
There you go. We were able to sell 745,840,000 more pounds of BPA in the year 2012 alone. And then Mother Jones came out in 2013 and they said, check it out. We're going to estimate that BPA is going to jump from 13.1 billion in sales in 2013 to 18.8 billion sales in 2019. So we're imagining a 44% jump. So invest now in BPA. So look at these numbers, man. We're talking, $18.8 billion being spent on well over now probably 16 billion pounds of this stuff being produced in the United States and abroad. It's a world production. So if you need picogram levels, teeny levels, the same levels that you have for hormones in the human cell, extremely small levels, and now you're talking billions of pounds, here's what the research is showing, dude. You go across the globe and you can't find an animal anywhere that doesn't have BPA in it.
Just from rainwater?
No, literally, it's not. It's air and rainwater and everything. There was a test that was done on ants, okay? It was done across 17 different countries. And they found way back in the deep rainforests out in the boondoggles, levels of BPA large enough to affect reproduction function in ants. So the endocrine disrupting chemicals have blanketed the earth. In fact, Theo Colburn, before she passed, had said, look, guys, this onslaught of chemicals that change hormonal function is as big a concern as climate change. Mm-hmm. And it may be something that alters life function quicker because of how it changes reproduction and development of species. So, you've got to think, and there's some people say, like, for example, our president right now is very much into the economy. Our president, Trump, says, you know what, guys, if we can keep America great and have it be fantastic, then this is more important than anything. Our economy has to be strong. Our internal fuel production has to be strong. So in August of this year, actually, he was over at the Shell Pennsylvania Petrochemical Complex in Pittsburgh. And he was saying, well, just outside of Pittsburgh, Monaco, he was saying, hey guys, check it out. We're going to have this awesome facility complete by the year 2020. And we're going to take all sorts of byproducts from fracking and natural gas, and we're going to produce a ton of plastics. because plastics is the new economy. It's going to keep our economy safe. We're going to be able to efficiently use some of the byproducts from our fuel manufacturing and turn it into, plastic straws and other things, right? Where it turns into these beadlets. Well, we've now seen that the plastics industry is producing all these beadlets used for all sorts of different industries. They spill them everywhere. They spill them by the tons, and they end up in the environment. Now, you talked about something called bioaccumulation, right?
Yep.
Everybody knows about the Pacific garbage patch, right? Everybody knows that
I wish everybody knew about the Pacific garbage patch.
Okay,
The
well,
people we know.
yeah, right. Well, okay, well, these massive islands of trash in the middle of multiple different oceans. It's not just the Pacific now, where
It's like
you can
7
go.
major gyres.
Yeah, you can go for miles and miles and you see nothing but plastic debris. But what they're not talking about is the plastics break down over time. They never fully biodegrade, but they break into smaller microplastics and then nanoplastics, and then they get into everything. They get into the life supply. Now, here's what Pete Myers and others have been looking at is that when animals die, the plastics are usually stored in the fatty tissues, and they'll die, and the animals and plants, whoever that incorporated plastics, will drop to the bottom of the ocean, but the fats from them do not. The fats will float up to the surface of the ocean because fat doesn't mix with water and it floats. So he says we have this layer on top of the ocean. He calls it the sea surface microlayer. The sea surface microlayer has 100,000 times higher level of these endocrine disrupting plastic chemicals and other chemicals than anywhere else because the fat floats. So what's going to be interacting with the surface of the water? Is it going to be fish and sea turtles and seabirds and you name it, right? So then
Unbelievable.
So
it's compounding. Every drop that goes in the ocean then distills up to the top to basically compound and feed the rest of the sea life so that it just happens faster.
Yep. So we're going to get this stuff everywhere. You know what? And the reality is everybody says, well, gosh, it's so small. The levels that you're talking, don't even worry. Microplastic, nanoplastics, nanoplastics is, it's much smaller than the human hair, right? So don't even worry about it. It's not going to have an effect. Well, nonsense, because we now know that cellular, hormonal signaling occurs at these teeny chemical levels, right? And if you look at all sorts of literature, if you compare people who have the highest level to lowest level of BPA, for example, they're 2 times more likely to be obese. Shoot, you're seeing it now, Pedram, in conventional scientific literature. You see Journal of American Medical Association, JAMA. I remember an article in 2008. It clearly said for each quintile of BPA increase you had in this study, so that the larger amounts of BPA you had per section, they divided it in 4 different sections, or 5 different sections. Each section that you rose up had a 39% increase in cardiovascular disease risk and a 35% increase in type 2 diabetes risk. Oof. Meaning all you had to do is just slightly increase, and you were getting a massive increased risk for multiple diseases. In fact, Joe Pizzorno, one of my mentors and friends, he says, gosh, you can actually track the percentage increase of diabetes in the United States to endocrine disrupting chemicals. So a certain percentage of it, and he estimates it close to 20%, is attributed directly to these chemicals. So you say, well, yeah, it's going to be the sugar. Yeah, it's going to be the lack of exercise. And it's also going to be the fact that people are handling receipts and that people are eating foods that are wrapped in plastics. So I don't know, a recent article just came out showing that different chemicals that wrap up meats, for example, and cheeses are now shown in higher levels in people who consume fast food on a regular basis. So basically, if you're going through your life and you are exposing yourself to higher levels of these plastics, you're exposing yourself to higher risks of disease. And we have an administration right now who's very friendly to plastics and is not conscious of the fact that these are associated with these diseases. So basically, we're on a freight train towards a very poor destination of obesity and diabetes and cancer and all sorts of things.
I mean, maybe even an extinction event, right? Like we've never been here, right? We're changing the makeup of the species by putting these microplastics in our system. We're changing our organs. We're changing our sexual virility and vitality. We're changing a lot of things. There's a piece to this. I mean, Pizzorno is just, he's a hero. He's been doing amazing work. And, what is it? One of the stats he told me is like, if you live within a quarter mile of a freeway, your chance of having cardiovascular disease goes up by 50% just for the diesel fuel. Right.
Yeah. So that's actually massive. The air pollutants that we're seeing, the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, the benzoapyrene, they're incredibly toxic. And when I'm looking at Alzheimer's research as well, right? Because that's where I'm at these days. It's phenomenally potent to the brain directly because you're inhaling those toxins and it goes to the olfactory network and it ends up immediately into the brain tissue. So a lot of those ear pollutants are actually contributing to mild cognitive decline as well. So yes, cardiovascular disease, yes, diabetes, yes, you name it, because it increases inflammation, it increases toxic load, and you're breathing, over 10,000 cubic feet of air every day. So if in each breath you're having multiple molecules, just like you're having multiple microplastics in your tea bags, you inhale those in, they have to be filtered. They have to be processed. They're sticky. They're going to stick to you. They're going to want to stay in you. So you're going to have to get them out or reduce your exposure. And both seems like a great idea.
Yeah, I was going to say, nowadays, I don't care where you live, both, you can't do one without the other. It's like if farm animals in New Zealand are showing up with this stuff, if you're listening to this, chances are you're exposed, right? That's pure and simple.
And here's the one thing people are forgetting, right? You're saying climate change is the only thing, right? Everybody's talking about climate change and they're talking about, well, why is the climate changing? The climate is changing because of air pollution. Mm-hmm. So what is air pollution? It's particulate matter in the air. Well, are we going to be healthy when we breathe in particulate matter from the air? Well, here's the analogy I love to give on stage at the Institute for Functional Medicine. For a lot of my lectures, I'll say this. I'll say, hey, guys, what's the one thing all you physicians in this room know will increase disease risk more than anything else? What's the one researched human activity that's known to increase cancer, cardiovascular disease, stroke, diabetes? What's the one thing that you can do as a human that we scientifically can prove will increase your rates of all these diseases?
Smoking.
Yeah. So, come on, man. If we put all these particulates in the air that we're all breathing and we have this exhaust from our exhaust pipes, what are we all doing? We're all smoking. So it's interesting. I have an app on my phone. It's literally called Shit I Smoke. And what it does is it regulates the equivalence of your air pollutants in the air to how many cigarettes you're smoking per day. So it's got a little poop emoji in the form of a cigarette, and it says loading, cough, cough, cough when you press on it. And then it will tell you for your specific region, it says, oh, you smoke 0.3 cigarettes daily here in Bellingham, Washington today. So you can run this on your phone. And if you're in China or India or something, I imagine you're smoking a lot.
What's the name of the app again?
It's called Shit I Smoke.
It's actually called Shit I Smoke. That's great. I like.
Yeah, well, it says SH and then asterisk, right?
Sure. Apple Store. One of the things that, look, I'm doing a film right now with Robert Kiyosaki about money, and it's been blowing my mind because, spiritual people don't look at that stuff, right? And there's just this incredible heist happening right now with pensions and 401ks, and there's Wall Street has been duping the average worker, and you think you have a retirement, you got something coming to you. It's going to be a very provocative film. But one of the things I've been looking at in that is, so 1971, Nixon takes us off the gold standard. Dollars worth shit. And so they're like, we got to stabilize this somehow. So then they make a deal with Saudi Arabia and tie the dollar to petroleum and make sure that all petroleum and so energy is traded in dollars. And that became kind of the stability of our currency. And it also became, the centerpiece of our foreign policy and aircraft warrior diplomacy, because now anyone who has tried to get us off the petroleum standard, Saddam Hussein, Muammar Gaddafi, turns out dead, right? And Iran was talking that shit. And that's why we have all these beef with Iran. And so it's just this crazy geopolitical thing. And so I've been looking at this and reading about it, and I've been watching what's been happening with petroleum. And a couple months ago, U.S. was the biggest net exporter of oil, right? We have really stepped up our game, and yet we're still trying to control markets and not flood the market with a glut of oil because we want prices to be stable and dollar to be stable, all sorts of like really complicated shit. But we've been shunting it off into another use, which we've been talking about this whole time, called plastics. So all this fracking, all this shit that we've been doing to the environment to like extract oil from deep places and ruin watersheds, is creating a glut that is now getting tea manufacturers to say, hey, looks like plastic could be a great idea for a tea bag. And here we are, right? And so it's unbelievable watching the macro economics of the whole thing and then watching the microbiology of what's actually making us sick, obese, and just like, exhausted all the time. They're all way more interconnected than one wants to think.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, absolutely. I'm so glad you tied that in because really the big problem is the petroleum itself. It appears that these petroleum byproducts are being used in lots of different things. They're being used in detergents, for example, for laundry or cleaning or whatnot. They're everywhere. Anytime you have to have a really caustic, really potentially chemical reactive substance, these come in handy. But the issue appears to be that we really don't know when you start bunching a bunch of these different products up together what kind of effects they're going to have on cellular function, right? And unfortunately, when we're testing a lot of chemicals in the United States, guess how we do that? We do that on rats. We do that on mice. And I don't know if you saw this article that came out of France that was absolutely fascinating. But this article that came out of France showed us something amazing. It showed us that we're looking at all these rats and all these mice, and we're adding in pesticides, we're adding in insecticide, we're adding in fertilizers, we're adding in whatever to test the safety of them. So anytime you're testing something, Pedram, what do you need? You need an active group and a control. What does that mean? It means one gets the chemical and one is a saline solution or clean solution and has no exposure to that chemical, right?
Yep.
Well, guess what? These researchers in France showed us that the rat chow that all the researched rats have been given for years upon years is toxic. The rat
there is no clean rat.
Exactly. So they assume that all rats are going to get a certain level of cancer. They assume all rats are going to get a certain level of diabetes. It's just that type of rat. It's just that type of rat that gets it. But if they had that type of rat, which they wouldn't because they're genetically modified, or excuse me, they're raised in a particular way. They're not genetically modified, but they're raised in a way to have certain gene expression. So these rats, right? If they were not given some of these toxics in the rat chow, they may not end up with the cancers or the diabetes or whatnot. So Professor Seralini,
so their control was jacked.
Exactly. Professor Seralini, when he did his trial on GMO foods and Roundup and toxicity, he actually gave a clean rat chow to the rats. And he showed massive differences. And everybody called foul on him and said, wait a second, how's that possible? You had so much cancer growth. And that's the species of rat. It's already going to have that. He's like, but that rat didn't have it when I took it out of the rat chow. And it did have it when I fed them the GMO stuff and the Roundup. So the control isn't clean. For a lot of the chemicals that are being tested, the control is not clean. So that kind of raises your awareness like, oh, wow, we're being told there's a lot of stuff you can use and it's safe. There's a lot of stuff you can eat and it's safe. Did you know that food packaging materials have less regulation on them than most things out there? And there may be more chemicals in food packaging than there are in pesticides. So, we really need to step up our game and say, there are people out there making profits. There are people out there selling us stuff. We are being sold ideas. We're being sold products. And when you eat a very clean diet that you've grown yourself or wildcrafted and you ate out of packages and then you stopped eating out of packages, watch what happens.
Yeah.
Just look at your own health. This is the fascinating thing, right? Professor Seralini is a researcher who discovered the aromatase enzyme, right, which is now used for cancer prevention and whatnot. He said, this is wild. He says, Tom, look at this. I've been looking at chemical research for decades, and petroleum is actually amazing. It's the love communication molecules of plants and simple organisms that died millions of years ago.
Hmm.
And they were compressed down, and now they turn out to have these very potent rings, what's called benzene rings, that we can crack open and we can turn into energy. It's amazing. But those same rings were originally used as hormone communication molecules by those plants and animals. They were originally used to communicate back and forth and say, hey, you need to do this. I'm over here. We can reproduce. This happens, just like our own pheromones, our own hormones. They were used by these life forms as love communication molecules. And what we've done with them is we've brought them up, we've misshapen them by burning them, we've added fats to them, we've added solvents to them, and we've changed their shape. So what's happening now is that we're looking for these things, much like we would look for our own hormones, our own communication molecules. And so we incorporate them into our bodies and they bypass our systems because we're thinking, great, we have something to tell us how to be, what to do, how to communicate, how to reproduce. And instead, their structure is wrong. So we're having miscommunication. We're interfering with the normal development, the normal reproduction that we would normally have. Have you seen these articles now, Pedram, about these women who are exposed to phthalates and plastics in their diet or their food packaging and their sex drive drops? So
Yep.
There's a direct correlation between libido and plastic exposure.
Yep.
I mean,
xenoestrogens everywhere.
yeah. So it's bizarre when you look at it that way. All this is miscommunication. Really,
Yep.
we want to receive the proper signaling and we're not getting it.
So let's turn the corner because, look, it's easy to listen to all this depressing shit and be like, oh my God, the sky's falling. And, a lot of people go, oh, I can't listen to this stuff. It's depressing. And instead of using it to pivot their lives and feel better and spring the trap, it's just like, it's too much. Like climate change is overwhelming for a lot of people. So let's get into what people can do right now to get this crap out of their lives and start feeling better.
That's great. Consumerism. So what you purchase, how you move the economy changes things. So that's where the biggest shift happens is through demand. So if everybody jumped up today and said, I'll never use a plastic straw again, I'm never going to use a plastic bag again, you'll make a huge difference. There's trillions of plastic bags used every year. We're finding plastic straws in the nostrils of sea turtles. Like we've got to be conscious of who we are and what we're doing here on this planet. And you can vote with your dollar here. You know that. Come on, Pedram, you've been telling us all that for a long time now. But if you just start purchasing products that are plastic free, that are not wrapped in plastic, that are not built with plastic, look at your clothing, microplastic fibers in clothing. There's now research showing that athletic clothing causes migration of plastics into the athletes. So you've got to watch.
Let alone the watershed when they wash this stuff.
Right, the microfibers get into the fish. You saw that article too. That was a good one.
Yep.
So yeah, it's us. It's us just saying, can I get organic cotton with natural dyes? Can I get hemp? Can I get wool? Can I, when I purchase my food, look for stuff that doesn't have plastic packaging? Can I eat more fresh foods? Those are the simple things. We saw an article that showed a reduction in phthalate and BPA exposure by 66% when people ate what was called a fresh food diet, meaning they didn't eat out of plastic bottles, they didn't eat out of cans, they didn't have foods that were wrapped in plastics, just for a few days, and they could see a drastic drop in their plastic exposure in just a few days. So just being aware will do a ton, and then purchasing based on that awareness will do even more. Once you have the plastics in your system, you can assist in getting them out by sweating, by exercising, by consuming lots of green leafy vegetables and having lots of fibers. Those things will help accelerate and making sure your bowels are moving. If your bowels are not moving, then you're likely keeping things in your system.
And just back to where we started. I mean, look at all the waste that's created by individual tea bags. Loose leaf tea, right? There are lots of companies out there selling clean, organic, good supply chain teas that you don't have to put in these individual tea bags. I mean, look, if you still insist on a tea bag, make sure it's paper, make sure it's clean and all that. But look at the way you're consuming each of these products and ask yourself, hey, what is this? Like what is a tea bag? Tea bags were not here in our grandparents' generation, right? Like, these things started to show up, they're made somewhere. So what are they made out of? Can you trust that that paper is clean? It doesn't have glue or some just funkiness that they put in there to make the thing work, right? And if you could avoid it, why not, right? I mean, it's not that hard. You boil some water, you get a little strainer, you make some tea. It's nicer, it's more communal anyways, right? You do a tea ceremony and sit down and have a pot of tea and share it with someone. These tea bags, it's an unnecessary exposure. We got enough in the air and everywhere else we're looking. Any unnecessary exposure is just folly, in my opinion.
That's it. If you just are conscious, if you just look at what you're exposed to on a daily basis, so you wake up in the morning, what clothes are you putting on? You go to drink some water. Where's the water coming from? What kind of glass or vessel or cup is it in? Is it a hot coffee that you just got from Starbucks and the lining of that coffee cup is getting into your coffee, or the lid plastic from that is getting into you as you're drinking that hot coffee? Is it the high fructose corn syrup that they squirted into that coffee as a flavoring that has a bunch of chemicals laden in it? All right, well, what's your next step? Were you getting into your car? Is it a new car? Have you off-gassed that new car by heating up and then opening up the windows and heating it up? And, what have you done to diminish your exposure to the car chemicals? And then you're going into work, or you're going, just being conscious of what you're doing, where you are, will kind of raise your awareness as to like how far we've come from what we originally did when you were talking about the Bushmen in your Vitality movie. Come on. It's like, or Origins, actually. That was Origins.
It was Origins, yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah, those guys were not huffing paint and they were not drinking plastic.
Right? Yeah. And they were lean and mean and really happy.
Chasing down lions, right? Like, yeah, take a hint, right? It didn't used to be this way. We didn't have this much cancer and diabetes. And there's something new. It's like there's this great book called Emperor of All Maladies about the research into cancer. And one of the things was like this guy had like irrefutable evidence, and he's like, "Look, it's from smoking, stupid." And the guy's looking at the stats, and he says, "Listen, it could just as likely be from nylon stockings. We've had so many of those show up. We don't know what it's. There's so many things that have been added to our environment within 100 years that everyone's looking for a smoking gun. What if it's all of it, right? What if we're surrounded by it, and the reason you don't feel well and the reason your energy levels are down and your sex drive is down is because of these little micro exposures every single day from all around you, right?
And
from
each one makes a difference. And that's the thing. I love that you're saying that, because each little thing is a contributor. So Martha Herbert, right? She's a neurologist at Harvard University. She says, and a professor there, she says, hey, there are no causes of disease. There are only contributors. This is systems biology. We are in a system, and every single action has a reaction. So look at all the little actions that are occurring, and when you make each actionable change, you will have a reaction to that change. So breathing deeper helps. Breathing clean air helps. Eating clean food helps. Watching your plastic exposure helps. Getting better sleep will help you detoxify. Improving your gut function will help you process over 50% of your toxins, because it turns out gut bugs are processing toxins. Have you seen Gregor Reed's work, Pedram? That was pretty awesome. I interviewed that guy.
Oh my God. Share it. We're almost out of time, but this is good.
Yeah. Gregor has been looking at Lake Victoria in South Africa, how it's just totally toxic with chemicals. And he's like, how can I save these people? They're all dying. They're eating out of this lake. And he says, gosh, I'll give them probiotics. And he studied a couple of strains of probiotics that once these people ate these probiotic yogurts that he gave them the probiotics for, and fermented millet, then all of a sudden they'd start sequestering the arsenic and the mercury and the other toxins in the environment, and they'd start pooping them out because the microbes literally engulfed the toxins. And when the microbes died, they came out in the poop. So it turns out that the probiotics. It turns out that you eating fermented foods and getting your gut in balance actually has a massive shift, a massive change towards detox. In fact, they're estimating 50% of all detoxification occurs with the microbiome, whether it's on your skin, in your nasal passage, in your lungs, or in your intestinal tract. So it's a huge player.
So if you haven't seen my Interconnected series, go to interconnectedseries.com and find it, because we spent 10 episodes talking about this. And then the other part of that is, look, what did Tom say? Lots of vegetables, poop it out, sweat it out, and stop the exposure, right? Like, it's not rocket science, but you do have to take an active role in this, because it's not going to just come out itself. You have to eat the right kinds of foods, lots of fiber, green leafy vegetables, to get the body's detox systems pulling the stuff out of you. Get your microbes on board, because that's 50% of it right there. And then obviously you can't retox while you detox, right? So don't get the plastic lids at Starbucks. Don't, rub your fingers on the receipts. Don't have the microplastic in your tea bags, and just look around you. And once you do so, man, it's like the lights turn back on. People who, finally kind of come out from under that cloud of toxic plastic exposure, suddenly, I mean, you've seen it so many times in clinical practice. It's like, dude, the flickering light stays on. They have energy, and their life kind of comes back online.
They wake up. They feel that you hear, I feel 20 years younger. Clean up your diet, clean up your life, and you'll get a life back. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Amen, brother. Hey, so where can people find you? Where can they find your work? I mean, you're a regular on my show for good reason. I love you so much. And, I always want to encourage people to find your work and your writings, because it's just, you're doing great stuff out there.
Yeah, well, my Facebook is just, Tom Altere, TOMMALTERRE. And then the website, still wholelifenutrition.net. And, we've got some programs there and in the book and whatnot. So, and lots of recipes and fun information. So come on down.
Yeah, great. Always great to talk to you, man. You are a hero. Keep up the good work. I'm looking forward to seeing you in a couple of my upcoming series. If you guys have seen any of my movies, Tom was like the star of Origins, and he's all over it, interconnected. It's just the guy's got a lot of great things to say, and his head and his heart are in the right place. So good on you, brother. Good on you. Keep up the good work. Folks, don't get scared. Don't panic. Get to work. Right? Stop poisoning yourself, start detoxing. And with the clarity and the added energy that comes into your life, you'll make more and more good health decisions, good life decisions, and things start moving in the right direction. I promise you, I've seen this 100,000 times. And Tom,
Yep.
Yeah, that's just the way it works, folks. All right. It's Dr. Pedram Shojai, the Urban Monk. Glad to be back. Hope to see you soon. Check out some of the new stuff on theurbanmonk.com. Got some new programs. Just got some good stuff happening. I'm up in the mountains now, and I got more time to kind of lean in and do good service to my audience. And so you're going to see some more blogs. You're going to see a bunch of cool stuff. So stay tuned, and I'll see you around.